this morning to tell us more about the former statesman's role in the build-up to the announcement. Very good morning to you, and thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Jordaan. I'm going to ask you to start a little bit about a context. Let's flesh this out. Madiba and his contribution to sports in general, soccer to be specific, is immense. Tell us a bit about the history of that.
Yeah, I think very often we look at Madiba shaping history, but even in his absence, Madiba shaped the history of this country. And if you look at football specifically, when we have the Rivonia trial, FIFA first banned South Africa, briefly accepted South Africa again for 62, 63, but in 64, when Madiba went to prison, FIFA then banned South Africa. In 1976, when you had the so-called Soweto uprising, FIFA then, in September of that year, 1976, expelled South Africa. So both the banning and the expulsion of South Africa out of FIFA was linked to the liberation struggle, and specifically in the 60s, around the arrest and the imprisonment of Nelson Mandela. So for the period of the 27 years of Madiba in jail, South Africa had no contact with FIFA. And that only started again when Madiba was released in 1990. And of course, by 1987, the message from Lusaka, from the ANC, came that we must unify sport and football must lead. And so many of us went to Lusaka. Of course, ANC was banned at that time. But the last meeting in 1989, where the person who later became president, Thabo Mbeki, was head of international relations. Barbara Masekela was there. She was head of the cultural desk of the ANC, and many other ANC leaders. And the instruction was go back and unify football. So we then formed SAFA by 1991 as a non-racial, non-sexist and democratic unified governing body of South African football. And then it was the question of getting South Africa back as a member of FIFA. But when FIFA expelled South Africa in 1976, they put two conditions. One, that the controlling body must be non-racial, must include everybody, and must remove all racism out of football. Secondly, it must remove from the statute books apartheid. So apartheid must cease in terms of law and policy. So by 1992, you can very well imagine that we had complied with the first requirement, namely a single non-racial body, but we did not comply with the second one, that apartheid must cease in terms of law and policy. So we had then succeeded in getting Sepp Blatter, was then the Secretary General of FIFA, and Joe Haviland, who was the president, to come to South Africa, and they were keen to meet with Madiba. They met with Madiba, and of course their question was, fine, apartheid is still intact, but the transition that was in place at the time, the negotiations, is that irreversible? And Madiba made it clear that the people's march to democracy was irreversible. And we're going to have a democratic election, we're going to remove all of the apartheid laws from the books. And they went back to Zurich and recommended to the executive of FIFA that Madiba says the move to a non-racial, non-sexist democratic South Africa is irreversible. Let us then recommend that South Africa come back in 1992, 2 years before the democratic election.
So sport played a pivotal role in the struggle for the liberation struggle in South Africa. I know many of the prisoners on Robben Island used sport as a therapeutic means to try and keep their mind focused and not wallow in their misery. But also now you're telling us that it was a vehicle for transformation.
Yes, the one thing that apartheid couldn't do was to ban sport. They banned everything. Sport and religion. So people assembled in the churches, and so you'll see the religious leaders taking a very strong leadership role in the liberation struggle and the sports movement. because apartheid wanted to maintain international relationships. And if you look at the second state of emergency, 1985, South Africa's international contacts were reduced from 129 South African sports who were members of international federations to 29 by 1985. So our responsibility as part of the sports movement was to drive the process of the isolation of South African apartheid sport. And FIFA gave us tremendous support in that regard. And so when we said we are ready to be accepted, FIFA accepted us back in 1992. And also the Barcelona Olympics, South Africa participated 1992. It was a small team, but it was a symbol that the world was ready to support the drive to democracy, and Madiba was central in convincing the world that we will arrive there, as we did in 1994. But it was his word.
Fast forward a couple of years, we're back with a bang in international sport. A little bit of Madiba magic when it comes to the Rugby World Cup, and also sports. You can never forget that picture with Madiba and Neil Tovey and the trophy. He played a very, very important role in also boosting the morale of not only the nation but the players as well.
Yeah, I think Madiba saw the bridge to move South Africa from a racist, divided society to a single, non-racial society. That bridge is called sport. So it was very important that we use sport to unify, to bring together, to develop social cohesion, to get integration. And so we supported any initiative. In 1996, we were not the host of the African Cup of Nations. It was Kenya was supposed to host the African Cup of Nations. And so when the offer came, Kenya is not ready, well, you act and take over. Madiba was the president in 1996. He immediately agreed, yes, let's take the African Cup of Nations. And then, of course, he came to speak to the team, and not only were we the best hosts, we also won the African Cup of Nations. And that trophy is there, thanks to Madiba. And if you look at the picture, F.W. de Klerk was there, King Zwelithini was there, and Madiba. Steve Twitter was there, Minister of Sport. And Madiba is sitting on the ground. He was the first to go and sit on the ground in front of the players, and the others had to join. Even the king had to sit down on the grass in front of the team.
We're going to have to wrap as briefly as possible. Many people frowning on the achievements of our local or national teams at the moment, saying that we have dropped the ball somewhat. What do we do to make sure that we support the likes of Bafana Bafana, the box, as well as all the national teams, rugby, hockey, you name it? What do we do as South Africans to boost their morale, to make sure that we relive the former glory?
Absolutely. We must. We have young teams, both in rugby and in football. The average age of the teams are now just over 20, 24. And Madiba would say that we must encourage them and not be too harsh when they fail. We must support them, and so all of us must believe in our teams again, support them, and they will deliver for this nation.
Thank you so much. Thank you again for your time. SAFA President Danny Jordaan. And of course, we'll never forget that iconic moment when Sepp Blatter lifted that envelope, the contents of which had the names South Africa. And of course, Nelson Mandela playing a very pivotal role in securing that World Cup for us as well. We'll never forget that. And we are eternally grateful not only to him, but the rest of the nation as well. Peter.